And if they'll now have a transition to the next panel, which is on food safety and nutrition. And I would invite Denis and his panelists to join us on the table. And just while the new panelists take in their place, I would ask if our technical advisors here could actually run the film, please, on nutrition. This gives a short summary of the outputs and outcomes of the nutrition workshop, which was held in Nairobi a few months ago as part of the consultation. So could we start the film, please?
My name is Cyprian Auma, and I work for World Vision, based in our current office in Nairobi. From my field experience, what we have seen is that people know the solutions to the problem of malnutrition. So the issue here that I'm really passionate about is how we can work with the Australian people to make sure that some of the evidence-based interventions are scaled up. That's where we can achieve impact.
My name is Delia Grace, and I'm a veterinarian and an epidemiologist, and leading work at ILRI here on the diseases associated with agriculture, including diseases associated with food. One of the ones which I'm particularly interested in is this gap between nutrition and food safety. That in actual fact, the quality of food in terms of nutrition and the quality in terms of food safety are closely related, and yet they tend to be treated very separately. And we think that by closing this gap, by bringing the two communities, the food safety and the food security, together, we can get better results.
I think there is not enough food, and the variety is also limited. Many people grow maize or corn. You find they are limited, for example, in vegetables, fruits. And we feel that diversification is going to be very helpful in improving the nutrition of the people.
My name is Bruce Kogel. I'm from Bioversity International, which is part of the Consortium for Agricultural Research. I'm visiting here in Kenya with our colleagues to discuss issues around undernutrition. One of the things we're doing is looking at the drivers of undernutrition. And by drivers of undernutrition, we understand why undernutrition occurs and what we can do about it.
I'm John McDermott. I'm the director of a new CGIAR program called Agriculture for Nutrition and Health, in which the nutrition and health is human nutrition and human health. Some of the key gaps that exist are how do we move from kind of agricultural value chains and food systems to the kinds of diets that people need, especially young children and pregnant women. So that's a big gap. And then who needs to be involved? I think one of the big gaps is the food industry is dominated by private sector partners, but we're not very good at engaging them, and I think they're interested in being engaged now.
I'm Dr. Judith Sentumbwe. I work with the Ministry of Agriculture and Marine Industry and Fisheries in Uganda. Currently the Assistant Commissioner in charge of dairy and meat in the country. Uganda has quite a lot of food when you compare it with many countries in the region. Unfortunately, you find that we still have high levels of stuntedness, underweight, children dying. About 45% of the children die because of nutrition-related illnesses per year, which is very unfortunate. In fact, in the southwest of Uganda, where we have the food basket, you actually find that the level of stuntedness there is about 50% compared to, for example, the central region, where it's about 20%. So that is really malnutrition in face of plenty. And that means that possibly one of the interventions that Australian International Food Security Centre could help us with, the need to impart knowledge among the mothers and other caretakers on the need to invest in nutrition.
I'm Ruth Onyango. I'm Kenyan, advocating for improved food and nutrition security for Kenya and for Africa, and especially for our children and women. First of all, I just want to say I'm happy to serve on the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research Policy Advisory Council. I've been there now for the last 2 years, and I was there when they hadn't come to Africa yet.
I think that gives a good introduction to this session. The moderator of this session is Dr. Denis Kyetere, who is the Executive Director of the African Agricultural Technology Foundation based in Nairobi. Denis, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now that's the challenge of trying to catch up with our time. One of our panelists is leaving at within the next 30 minutes, so we try to finish in the next 30 minutes. With me, we are distinguished to have from my left, Professor Judith Kimiywe, who is the chairperson of the Department of Nutrition and Dietetics at Kenyatta University. Next to him, we have Dr. Emile Frison, who is the Director General of Biodiversity International. On my right, Mr. Tony Rinaudo, who is the Advisor Natural Resources, Food Security and Climate Change for World Vision Australia. And on the far right is Dr. Appolinaire Djikeng, who is the Senior Scientist for Technology Manager at Biosciences Eastern and Central Africa, that is the BecA at the Iri Hub in Nairobi, Kenya. I'll try to catch up, but before we start, we have been talking about partnerships. One thing I would like to comment on is that the organization I head is an organization that facilitates and manages public-private partnerships to access, adapt, and deliver appropriate agricultural technologies for small-scale farmers in sub-Saharan Africa. May I, at this juncture, we shall call the first person who should be leaving at 4:30, Mr. Tony Rinaudo, shares with his thoughts.
Thank you. Could I have the presentation, please? Thank you. So I'll skip formalities in order to save time. In my talk, I'll give two examples of participatory research and project delivery. I'll talk a little bit about World Vision's evolution in thinking on this subject and just highlight a few lessons learned. Is that on? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So by the 1980s, in Niger Republic, they had experienced almost complete loss of their woody vegetation, and that had a massive impact on crop production because of loss of fertility, water holding capacity, etc. And this exacerbated the impact of droughts and contributed to the severity and the frequency of famines. Conventional approaches to address that deforestation were almost a total failure. We entered into a process of informal participatory research and dissemination of a concept called farmer-managed natural regeneration, or FMNR, which is basically the regeneration of trees from existing tree stumps, roots and seeds already in the soil. And over a period of 2 to 3 years, crop yields increased, sometimes double or triple, admittedly from a low baseline though. There was a massive increase in fodder availability, in firewood and poles, both for domestic consumption and for sale, so incomes increased. And there was an impact on drought, on wind speeds, on insects. The effects of those were much, much reduced. And so farmers got excited. And I think the guy in the top right corner there, if he'd been born in a different place, he'd be the CEO of an advertising corporation. But they implemented this very simple, very cheap process. But what's more, they talked about it, they shared their experiences, and they promoted it. So tree cover dropped from an average of about 80 trees per hectare at the turn of the century to an average of 3 by 1984. But through FMNR, the average today is around 50, with some farmers leaving 100 to 150 trees per hectare and still growing their staple food crops. And this process has spread to about 5 million hectares across Niger, and it's estimated to impact food production by about 500,000 tonnes, additional tonnes of grain per year, enough to feed 2.5 million people. And to me, this is very surprising because it really shouldn't have happened. The government policies at the time actively worked against farm tree ownership. There was no government program to promote agroforestry and very few NGOs involved in it. And yet it spread at a rate of 250,000 hectares per year over a 20-year period. And my conclusion is it largely happened from farmer to farmer. The process, we facilitated in a way the process. We sent the experts, in other words, the farmers, many of them who were illiterate, but they were experts in FMNR. We sent them to the four corners of Niger, and we invited anybody who would listen, who wanted to come and spend a day with the farmers to see what they were doing and hear for themselves why they were doing it. Other NGOs, government departments, faith-based organisations, farmers groups, anybody who was interested. And the farmers had a credible voice. They used to say to me, Mr. Tony, if you tell us to do something and it fails, we go hungry, but you go home and eat a full meal. But if a farmer tells us, we know that his livelihood is at stake and his fed income, he'll tell the truth about what he's saying. I started to think about what happened in Niger, and it occurred to me that if FMNR spread at that rate without any assistance, and in fact in a negative, unsupportive environment, what would be possible if there was a little bit of support and in a positive environment? So if we built on the foundation of the farmer being the primary promoter, but added to that government support and favourable policies, researchers and universities that could give us informed choices on the best way to achieve our goals, and NGOs and government extension services working together, hosting conferences, workshops, producing educational materials and facilitating exchange visits. What would happen if that was the case? And I've been very encouraged. Many speakers today have echoed the same sentiments. We had our first opportunity to test this in Tigray, northern Ethiopia, where severe famine is all too frequent and common hunger is common. Chronic hunger is common. And it's a region of Ethiopia that has experienced severe land degradation. But one of the things that governments and NGOs have done over the last 3 decades is to plant an Australian acacia tree, Acacia saligna. And we saw this as a low-hanging fruit, an opportunity to develop that as a viable crop. And so we entered into a participatory research program that involved World Vision, the Tigray Agricultural Research Institute, and farmers groups that we called farmer research groups. And trials were conducted both on farms and on the station. The farmers received weekly visits from the researchers, so they felt a part of it from the very start. Their voice was heard, and immediately as problems arose, the researchers were there to assist. And then every quarter there would be a meeting, and the researchers would give feedback on progress to the farmers. And the results have been very encouraging. There was no management of these trees before that partnership started, but today the trees are being managed for maximum wood production, for fodder, and we're looking into human food potential as well. Farmers are talking and spreading the news even before peer-reviewed articles are being published. As the research rolls out, the farmers are already doing it and promoting it. Agroforestry with this tree, which hadn't occurred before, is now starting to spread because the farmers have seen that there are net benefits in growing this tree in association with their crops. They know how to dry the leaves for fodder now, and it increases the protein content of the roughage that livestock are utilising. And they're no longer scared to leave their beehives near the trees because they've learnt through the research that there's no detrimental effect on their unique white honey that region produces. What's really interesting to me is that the farmers are impatient to eat the acacia seed. It has 40% carbohydrate, 25% protein, but before this partnership, nobody knew that it was even edible. They're pushing World Vision and TARI to hurry up, complete the research so that we can get on with it. 1 million out of the 4 million population are regularly hungry in that region. So a take-home point for me is that the farmers are not passive recipients of this knowledge. They're not waiting to be told what to do. They're active, they're thinking, they're contributing to the research agenda, and what's more, they're promoting it to their neighbours. Many lessons have been learned. I'll just share 2. One is the importance of the credibility of the NGO and the research organisation, because as it was mentioned earlier, it's a question of trust. What we're dealing with is people's livelihoods, and they have to trust us. And the second is this concept of farmer researchers and farmers as promoters being critical to the uptake and spread. And I'd just like to finish with a very short story. I lived in Niger Republic in West Africa for 17 years, and towards the end of that time, I took time to sit under the shade of a tree on a mat, and people from this particular village started to come around, and we were talking, and I'd wished that I'd done more of that during my time there. But I asked them, of all the things that we've introduced, what's had the most impact? And before they answered, my mind was racing, and I was thinking, oh, they would talk about this FMNR. It's had such a big impact on income and crop yield and the rest of it. Or they'd talk about the wells we dug, because you can only live a few days in the Sahel without water. Or the new crop varieties, the drought-tolerant and disease-resistant varieties. But, you know, they didn't mention one of those things. Instead, they said, Mr. Tony, before your project, we were nobody and nothing. All that we saw of our chief was the dust from his car as he raced through our village. But today, he stops and he consults with us. The only time we saw the government was when they wanted taxes or to fine us for chopping down the trees. Today, they bring international visitors to see our work. We were unknown, but today our village name is known in Australia, in the US, and many other places. And the message that I took home from that is the most significant change was that their humanity was acknowledged and their dignity respected. And that's the thought I want to leave with you this afternoon. Food security, research, adoption, it's not a black box to me. We're dealing with people, and acknowledging and acting on that will put us a long way forward towards achieving food security. Thank you.
Thank you. It's your turn now.
The push button.
Sorry.
Is it on?
Thank you.
I think it's on.
It's on.
Yeah. Okay.
Good. Okay.
Oops.
There. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Good. Okay, now, I'm Judith Kimiywe, as been introduced before. I'm a lecturer at Kenyatta University with the Department of Foods and Nutrition, but I've been involved in a lot of work with the Bioversity International, trying to promote indigenous knowledge and indigenous foods as a way of mitigating hunger, poverty, and nutrition. And I've worked very closely with the government institutions, agriculture, Ministry of Health, Education, and so forth. Now, what I'm going to do is to talk about the 3 areas that I was asked to look at. That is the double burden of malnutrition, and the first 1,000 days of life, and links to agriculture. So I'll more or less discuss those together. And first, to start with, let's look. I'm going to use Kenya as the example in my discussion, if that's okay with everybody. Magnitude and severity of chronic malnutrition in Kenya. We have quite a bit of a problem. At any one point, more than 10 million people are suffering from some chronic food insecurity and poor nutrition, and a lot of people are actually on food relief. And because of that, about 30% of the children are actually undernourished, and stunting is a big issue that we are trying to deal with in Kenya right now. Micronutrient deficiencies are also coming up with quite a lot of concern right now, because more than 50% of the children and women are suffering from some of the key micronutrient deficiencies. And now there's even a worse problem coming along, and that is the emergence of rickets. And because of this, if you look at the impacts of malnutrition per se, there is the effect on capital and economic progress, because these people will not have the potential to be able to uptake technologies and leave alone adapting anything innovative that will come their way later. And therefore, this also has a direct impact on the GPD.
Now for the double burden, the other side of it is the emerging overweight and obesity issue. And just like other countries in Africa, non-communicable diseases are becoming a burden to our nations. Like, for example, overweight and obesity in women now is going up to 40% in the urban areas in Kenya, and 22% of the children are also affected. This shift is because of the kind of foods people are eating now, and reduced, of course, activity, sedentary lives. And that impacts on people in very many ways, including early and premature deaths because of stroke and increased costs. And this is also the most productive group, the highly productive group, which we expect to be contributing to our economies, and that brings about the vicious circle of malnutrition. Now, the first 1,000 days, we very recently, about 2 weeks ago, we launched we signed to the Scaling Up Nutrition in Africa. We are the 30th country. And before then, we had already identified 11 high-impact nutrition interventions in Kenya. And we are working towards trying to use this because they are really they are cost-effective. Most of these interventions would cost less than $2 a year to implement, except for the last one, that is treating malnutrition, which will cost you up to $200 per child per year. And therefore, we are going more preventive. And as you can see, there's some agricultural implications in it because we are looking at food fortification of the locally available foods as one of the ways of mitigating the micronutrient deficiency. Complementary foods for children is another area that has got a big gap, where we think that dietary diversification through agriculture would help to fill in that gap too. Now, as far as the policy environment for improved nutrition is concerned, we recently, our president recently launched the National Food and Nutrition Security Policy, and this provides a close link between food and nutrition, and therefore the agriculture sector is completely involved in it. In fact, they took the lead in the development of these policies, and of course the objectives are very good to achieve the good nutrition for optimal health of all Kenyans, to increase quantity and quality of available foods which are accessible and affordable, and to protect the vulnerable groups through the various innovative and cost-effective ways. Now, those are the many priority areas that are the food, nutrition, and security policy are focusing on. And as you can see, most of the areas are completely agriculture-oriented in nature. And the good thing that has happened of recent is that the institutional implementation framework has been put in place, and it has brought all the key players on board. It is multidisciplinary, it's intra and intersectoral. And the partners, the development partners also are on board, and the NGOs. And now what I saw also of recent is that they have decided to, the ministries that are concerned have decided to bring on board the people from counties who are not necessarily professionals to also take part in this initiative. Now, we also launched during the signing up of the Scale Up Nutrition Program. That same day, we also launched the National Nutrition Action Plan 2012-2017, which is also going to help operationalize or put in place some of the strategies that we want to develop in order to achieve what we have alluded to in the food and nutrition policy. And again, as you can see from the crowded slide, is that agriculture is going to play a very big role, particularly in bringing about data diversity And schools, we are targeting schools also, public and private institutions where you can implement some of these programs by not just bringing good meals to those institutions, but also using them as a platform for instilling some of these good ideas that we are trying to put forward to mitigate the various food and nutrition security issues. And there is also strengthening of the coordination of partnership again, which is a key. They bring the key actors together, which is a key thrush of what we are going to do. But what we want to put in place strongly is to strengthen the nutrition surveillance, monitoring, and evaluation system, because that's what we have not really done very well. Find ways of reporting on what is actually happening so that we can continuously inform policy on what is expected to achieve our goals. The potential to achieving nutrition goals, I'm just finishing off. As I've already said, we already have the nutrition, food and nutrition policy in place, nutrition action plan in place, but we've also got in Kenya the Vision 2030, which is also taking up a center stage in trying to drive our programs. And then, of course, we have got the MDGs and the scaling up nutrition. The guiding principle, of course, are embedded in our constitution, and that is every person has the right to be free from hunger and to have adequate food at acceptable quality, and every child has a right to basic nutrition, shelter, health, and care. And so we have the goodwill of the government, and we are hoping that with that, we shall be able to move forward faster. Thank you very much. I'm sorry.
So if we can have the slides. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to make a contribution to this session here. I will be talking about biodiversity, dietary diversity, and quality. First of all, the context. We have already heard about the issues of the double burden of malnutrition, both undernutrition and overnutrition. Now, regarding the diversity of plants that are being used in our nutrition, we know that there are about 50,000 edible plants in the world. About 7,000 of those have been used throughout history for human nutrition. About 30 of them provide 90% of our calories, and just 3 of them provide more than half of the calorie intake. There has been a tremendous concentration of our dependency on a small number of crops. Now, what we need to do in order to address these issues of malnutrition is really to look at the food systems and to develop strategies for sustainable and resilient food systems, and look at what the role of diversity in that is. If we will have to rethink how food is produced, stored, processed, distributed, marketed, and consumed, the whole value chain, taking much more nutrition as an important criteria. There has been a major focus on productivity of major staples throughout the last several decades, which have been playing an important role in the dietary transition, which has been accompanied by a simplification of diets, and as Judith just mentioned, much more consumption of energy-rich but nutrient-poor foods with refined sugars and fats. And I think we have to look at the value chain and a food system approach to change that, and to look at ways to provide the necessary diversity that is necessary for human nutrition. This has all been accompanied also by other factors like habitat loss, resource depletion, population increases, and climate change, which all influence our agriculture and has to be taken into consideration. Now, what are the interventions that can be looked at? The nutritional status, which is eventually what we are trying to improve at the end of the day, is influenced by a large number of factors. And we already heard it's not just about availability of food, of course, it's also about access, but also this has to be accompanied, the food access has to be accompanied by appropriate care, healthy water and sanitation services. On the agricultural side, though, we must look at providing the necessary inputs for a diverse and nutritious diet. I'm not going to go through all the complexity of the slides here, but insisting on some of the interdependencies that we see between the nutrition and health status and the availability of diversity in an agricultural production system, and the role that it plays in and interfaces with income generation, but also taking sociocultural and traditions into consideration. I think these are factors which have often been neglected or not taken into consideration, just looking at the economic dimension. And I think we have to take much more into consideration also. We've heard from several interventions about the cultural, the importance of cultural dimensions for people in their values. Now, I think if we want to have sustainable diets and food systems, of course we have to produce the major staples to provide macronutrients, but this must be complemented with foods that provide the essential micronutrients in order to improve also livelihoods at the same time as providing ecosystem services. And I think we must recognize that the diversity in an agricultural system plays an important role both in decreasing risk by not putting all your eggs in the same basket. This is important with increasing variability of climate patterns as a result of climate change. We must also look at the impact that has on increasing resilience and avoiding natural capital depletion. Where does diversity fit in these value chains and the food systems? We know that the diversity can be a safety net against hunger. A lot of traditional crops have been used in and are still being used as hunger in periods between harvest are being used as hunger food. We also know that the diversity plays an important role in strengthening local food systems at the same time as environmental sustainability. And the most important aspect to the topic here today is the source of rich nutrients, and I will give some examples of that and the role it plays in diet diversity and quality. I was also asked to say a few words about the conference that was held in Johannesburg just 2 weeks ago, organized by The Economist, on Feeding the World, Africa. And there were 5 points that I would like to highlight there that came out of that. It was a very rich conference, and I didn't capture here all the lessons that came out of that, but I just want to highlight a few. First of all, the crucial role that women are playing, not only as producers of agriculture. We know that the majority of food in Africa is produced by women, but also as the ones that are in charge of the nutrition at the household level, and also as custodians of diversity. The importance of investment in research, and there was also an attention on the particular role of participatory research, and we heard from previous speakers here also the importance of considering farmers not just as recipient of knowledge, but as co-innovators. The need to look for innovative public-private partnerships. In the previous sessions, we heard already about that. Also a greater focus on the use of diversity of African crops. This continent, Africa, is a continent endowed with a lot of diversity. There is much more diversity in the traditional diets, unlike Asia, where there's much more focus on a few staples. And finally, the importance of not just looking at food security, but looking particularly at the nutrition dimension that came also clearly out of that. I just want to give one particular example of how agriculture and the use of greater diversity in agriculture can contribute to improving nutrition. This was some work that has been done with many partners, including community-based organizations, the Ministry of Health, the research organizations, a university in Kenya, and the private sector through a supermarket chain, looking all the way from improving seed quality, improving the production of quality produce, all the way down to developing recipes and making information about the use of those available, and improving the image that some of these traditional vegetables had as being considered as food for the poor, or this is what my grandmother used to eat and I want to be modern. And I think it has been a successful experience of turning that around, and where now people are again taking pride of what is part of their cultural heritage and part of their cultural and of their traditional diets. And I think this experience of bringing all these partners together to reintroduce a whole range of traditional green leafy vegetables. In the past, more than 200 species have been used, and they had virtually disappeared from the markets. Now, a lot of them can be found again in the markets, and the supply cannot follow the demand. By lunchtime, you don't find any of these in the markets anymore. So there is a tremendous potential to improve the income of the producers, but also the nutritional value. Compared to the kale or cabbage that was available in the market 10 years ago, these vegetables have 10 to 100-fold higher levels of micronutrients, of essential micronutrients. So in the interest of time, I would like to just conclude here by saying that a diversification of the agricultural system is an important part of addressing nutrition security, and we look forward to the role that the Australian International Food Security Centre can play in this area, and we certainly are keen to contribute to work with the centre in availing of these opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really delighted to be part of this panel, to learn as much as possible and also contribute significantly. So from previous speakers, I think they've made 3 observations. Panel 1 requested for more crops, and I would say for alternative livestock also. In the second panel, Lindiwe, through her brilliant presentation, reinforced the idea that if we are to contribute to food security, we should be targeting women and children. And Emile just talked about diversity. We have to harness the diversity if we are to prevent the erosion of genetic resources, and also go back to some of the crops that we used to eat or our grandparents used to eat, because some of those crops really carry a lot of advantages. One, they contain micronutrients that would otherwise not be found in many of the crops. And secondly, they are very well adapted in various agroecological zones, and therefore helping us to some extent fight against climate change. So I'll start with really the carry-on message for me is I'm pushing for us to concentrate also on under-researched crops and livestock as key contributors to food security. So we've talked about lots of statistics. Here, I just don't want to dwell on that, but the key message here is we need more innovation. Innovation for us to have better crops, healthy animals that would produce, and also have safe food. And finally, as I mentioned, we need alternative to classical crops. as you would agree with me that not everyone can own a cow. And in many countries in Africa, there have been programs, 1 cow per family, and some families still don't qualify to have to own a cow because it requires a lot of input. And through some of the work that we've done, which I'll share with you in a minute, we've identified mechanism for harnessing the diversity of crops and animals, and also helping small-scale farmers who cannot invest to actually own alternative livestock and also grow important crops that they can sell and also consume. So on this slide here on the left, we show that it's really reinforcing the point that I made, that really poor people cannot afford to have cattle. But if we give them a very good entry point, they'll build enough resources or income to be able to move up the ladder. And we see here that we have cavies at the very bottom, then those who are richer than those at the bottom will move to own chickens, and then the goats, and finally the cattle. So it would be unrealistic to think that we can push everybody to go to the top, but if we help people to start from the bottom, they'll finally get there. So on this here, we're proposing that alternative livestock also contributes significantly to food security and also income generation. On the right here, we're looking at amaranth, which is a key vegetable. It has a lot of nutrient, actually 30% more than common cereals. And it's also very diverse, and it would adapt in very agroecological zones, as I mentioned. If we were to harness this diversity, I think we will be able to empower people who live in various parts of the continent. So this is a cut up from a Daily Nation, our major daily newspaper in Kenya, showing a granny actually for many years could feed and be clothed through rodents. This is really reinforcing that she didn't own a goat, she didn't own a cattle, she didn't own a poultry, but she owned cavies, guinea pigs that could help her to generate income. And we really want to popularize this concept. And in here, through some of the work that we've done, and I want to acknowledge Australia Aid through the BecA CSRO partnership, which is really helping us to do this. With many of the partners which are shown here, we've mapped the presence of cavies in Africa, and we see that it is present everywhere in Africa, and this is work in progress. If we were to show you this map, maybe in a year or two, we'll see that this area may have increased. Therefore, creating the opportunity to really impact the lives of many people who are actually living at the poverty borderline. And cavie meat is really very high in protein, probably the highest as we know it at the moment. And I think in this program here, we're targeting women and children. How can we empower them? And we've seen a true transformation in DRC, where people really don't have enough input to own anything bigger than cavies. And they're actually able to eat good quality meat. They can have proteins, and they can also generate some income. On this slide here, I'm just showing that there are several varieties of amaranth, as I mentioned, that can be adapted in various places. And this program here, once again, through the BecA CSRO partnership, is really helping us to identify varieties that can be adapted in various regions. And along these lines here, we're also trying to increase the productivity and look at the nutritional quality. And I think we've started to see some of the impact here. And on the left here, we see a link with small and medium enterprise in Kenya, really empowering women. You can see very smiley faces there. They're able to eat good food and generate also income. And then we're using that opportunity to link with other global initiatives. Again, here's a global alliance for improved nutrition. So if we were to harness that diversity to use for improving the food quality, maybe through other cereals, I think we'll be able to make a very good contribution here. And on this one, as I mentioned, my key message here is if we target women and children, provide them alternative to large livestock, also alternative to the major crops, we should be able to offer solutions for food and nutritional security in Africa. And on this slide here, briefly, I just want to put things in perspective. I just want to touch on the Biosciences for Eastern and Central Africa. I think on many of the presentations here from Prof. Monty Jones across others, the message here is we need to do more training. We need to support a lot of research here, and it gave me the opportunity to really showcase what we are doing as we really play a significant role in backstopping all this initiative here. And Biosciences Eastern and Central Africa is an initiative to establish centers for excellence under the Africa Bioscience Initiative, jointly championed by the International Livestock Research Institute, ILRI, and the New Partnership for Africa's Development. And the hub is based in Nairobi, and that's where we're operating from. And on this slide here, I just want to really show you the type of research programs that we are currently driving on food security, nutritional security, and income generation, the biosciences for climate change mitigation, disease diagnostic for crop diseases and animal, low science input, that's what I talked about, under research crops and livestock. And the two examples that I show are just the two out of very many that we are looking at the moment. And finally, the capacity building. I wouldn't say much about it because in the next session, our director, Sekanet Kalemu, will really talk about the innovative approach that we've established for capacity building. And finally, one of the points I want to make here is our program is really aligned to the continental plan for agricultural productivity in Africa, the CADAP, the Asereka, Ruforum, and many other key players. And we really want to, we've established the magnet, which is really the biosciences, and want to really stay at the interface in supporting those initiatives. I'm just one person speaking for a team of many people, great people, and this is our team. We are from about 10 countries, and now we are about 50 people. And finally, I want to acknowledge the contribution and support from the government of Kenya, CEDA Canada for the initial investment, the Syngenta Foundation, many other donors. And I believe that together we can achieve food security in Africa. I want to stop here. Thank you for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, despite being pushed by time, the good messages have been delivered. If I may look at my chair, do we have one or two questions? Yeah, can we have one or two questions? I'll start with the Ruth and then come to Prof. The microphones there.
Thank you. I'm Ruth Colajori, and I'm a public health academic at the University of Sydney, where I have a small health and sustainability unit. My interest is in health, both as an input and outcome of sustainability, and I mean the three pillars of sustainability: environmental, economic, and social. And I'm particularly interested in non-communicable or chronic diseases. So I'm talking about heart disease, diabetes, cancers, and chronic lung disease. These diseases currently account for 60% of the world's deaths. This will rise to 75% by 2030, and they already cost $1 trillion a year in lost productivity. So obviously one of their main drivers is poor nutrition, whether it's overnutrition or undernutrition. And with the greatest sympathy for people who are going hungry, I shudder to think of what will happen when Africa goes to full mass food production and the proliferation of supermarkets and terrible quality food that we have here. So my question really is, this is obvious, several people have mentioned this, it's obviously of concern to you. You talk about the same problems and politics and issues that we talk about, but despite the fact there have been lots of mentions of health here today, we don't talk to each other. So your organisations, my professional organisations, our researchers and practitioners don't really talk to each other. So my question is, how can we talk with you and walk with you to find some joined up solutions and ways of optimising nutrition and human resilience and health without damaging the planet, for example?
Thank you, Ruth. Prof, and then I will request the members to answer quickly.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Dr. Judith Kimiywe on when you were talking about the food and nutrition insecurity in Kenya, you were giving some statistics. 10 million were food and nutrition insecure, something like that, I think. Now, I wanted to know whether this is a figure that is constant through the times, or it varies up and down depending upon the climate change. For example, there may be times when there is drought and then production is low, and there's a time when rain is normal. And what is this figure? Yeah, I would like just to know more about what that figure is like. Thank you.
I have seen more hands, but let's answer this and we'll go for the next one. So may I request Emile to answer the first one, and then Judith.
Yes, I agree that non-communicable diseases is actually the big problem of the future, and we know that more people die of non-communicable diseases in low and middle income countries than in high income countries, and that's a lot of this is an exponential growth, and I think this is really a public health problem number one for the future. And how can we work together? We co-organized 2 years ago a meeting with FAO on the notion of sustainable diets, having very much in mind how to produce within the notion of food systems a coalition of people that look at all the dimension of sustainable diets. And actually just before coming here we had a workshop in Madrid to try to put some metrics around the notion of sustainable diets to help us to convince policymakers, because if we don't have indicators and measurable indicators on what constitutes a sustainable diet, it will be very difficult to make real progress. So we are starting an initiative to develop these metrics and indicators as a starting point to build a coalition, I think, in moving forward.
Okay. Judith?
All right. About the 10 million. In Kenya today, as we speak about, almost half of the people, that is 50%, are living below poverty line, which means they can eat only 1 meal in a day or none. So which means already there are those people who are either due to poverty or other reasons. But there is also the natural calamities that come in now also and make this situation even worse, bringing even the poverty level to as high as 70%. So really, at any one point, about that many people are actually food insecure. Yeah, that's what I meant.
Good. As the chair is coming to the podium, a few messages to move forward with. The importance of participatory research, policy, as we have heard, then the need of reconsidering agricultural biodiversity, and also the consideration of the under-researched crops and livestock. Thank you very much.